The sun had not yet risen over Iloilo when Liza Domingo pulled her rubber boots on and walked the same cracked path she had walked every morning since she was 12 years old. The fish market smelled of salt and diesel, of ice melting on concrete, of a life that never once asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up. She had wanted to be a singer. Everyone in her barangay knew that. But wanting and having were two very different currencies in a house where the roof leaked every rainy season and her mother's medicine cost more than a week of selling bangus and tilapia combined. Liza's mother, Nita, had been sick for 3 years. It started as a cough that would not leave, then became something the doctors in the provincial hospital spoke about in hushed, careful words. Liza never fully understood the name of the illness. She only understood the shape of it, the shape of her mother growing thinner, of medicine bottles lining the windowsill, of nights spent boiling ginger tea because there was nothing else left to give. Her father had left when Liza was 6, gone to work on a fishing vessel bound for waters no one in the family could name, and he had simply never come back. No goodbye, no letter, no closure. Just an empty space at the dinner table that Liza's mother filled with prayers and Liza herself tried to fill with song. She sang while she gutted fish. She sang while she walked home in the dark. She sang to her mother at night, old Visayan lullabies mixed with pop ballads she'd heard on a second-hand radio, and her mother would close her eyes and say, "Anak, you have a voice from God, don't let this market swallow it." It was her mother who saw the flyer first, taped crookedly to a sari-sari store wall, half-torn by rain. Auditions were coming to the Philippines for an international talent competition, the kind of show families gathered around old television sets to watch, the kind where ordinary people became extraordinary overnight. Nita didn't have much strength left in her hands, but she had enough to grip her daughter's wrist and say, "You are going. I don't care how. You are going." Liza fought her at first. There was no money for transport, no proper clothes, no confidence that a fish vendor from a small barangay could stand on a stage in front of people who decided the fates of hopeful strangers. But her mother sold the only gold necklace she had left, a wedding gift, one of the last physical memories of a marriage that had otherwise dissolved into silence, and pressed the money into Liza's palm. "Sing for both of us," her mother whispered. "I may not be strong enough to stand in that crowd, but I will be standing in your heart. Let them hear what I have always heard." The journey to the audition city felt like crossing into another world. Liza had never seen buildings so tall, crowds so loud, cameras so unblinking. She stood in line for hours in a borrowed white blouse and a skirt her neighbor had sewn from spare fabric, clutching a small photo of her mother in her pocket like a talisman. Around her, other hopefuls rehearsed dance routines, magic tricks, comedy bits, their confidence loud and performative. Liza said nothing. She simply hummed under her breath, low and steady, grounding herself the way she had learned to do over years of long, uncertain nights. When her number was finally called, her knees felt like water. Backstage, a production assistant handed her a small microphone and asked if she was nervous. Liza only nodded, unable to trust her own voice yet, saving every ounce of it for the moment that mattered. The walk toward the stage felt endless. Bright lights bled through the curtains ahead of her, and she could hear the low murmur of the judges' panel already exchanging small talk, unaware that in a few moments their afternoon would be interrupted by something none of them expected. Liza stepped out from behind the curtain, and even from a distance, she could make out the judges' table, 4 chairs, for faces that decided so much with so little. And there, unmistakable even from where she stood, was Simon Cowell, arms crossed, his expression the same unreadable mask the whole world had grown used to. "State your name and where you're from," one of the judges said. "My name is Liza Domingo," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm from Iloilo, in the Philippines. I sell fish in the market with my mother. She's sick, and she couldn't be here today, so I'm singing for her." Simon leaned forward slightly, the way he always did when something in a contestant's words caught his attention despite himself. "And what are you going to sing for us today, Liza?" "An original arrangement," Liza said. "About someone who gave up everything so I could stand here." The music began softly, a piano line stripped bare, almost fragile, and for the first few bars Liza's voice matched it, delicate, careful, the sound of someone testing whether the room would hold her. But as the first verse gave way to the pre-chorus, something shifted. Her voice grew warmer, rounder, carrying an ache that came from someplace far deeper than technique. She sang about salt water and gold necklaces, about a mother's hands, about a father's absence, about a small house with a leaking roof that never once dimmed the love inside it. By the time she reached the final chorus, Liza closed her eyes and let go completely. Her voice climbed, note after note, rising with a controlled power that silenced every whisper in the audience. And then came the note that would replay across social media feeds for weeks afterward, a sustained, soaring high note held with such raw emotional force that several audience members visibly gasped, hands flying to their mouths. Simon Cowell's arms uncrossed. His posture, famous for its stillness, its guarded skepticism, broke entirely. His eyebrows lifted, his mouth parted slightly, and for the first time in the audition, he looked less like a judge evaluating a performance and more like a man who had been caught off guard by something real. Beside him, another judge was already wiping tears from her cheek, and the fourth judge stood halfway out of his chair, applauding before the final note had even faded. The room erupted. Liza opened her eyes, breathless, uncertain what she had just done, and found 4,000 strangers on their feet, screaming, clapping, some crying openly. She searched instinctively for something familiar in the chaos and found nothing, no mother in the crowd, no neighbor, no fish market regulars. Only strangers who somehow, in 3.5 minutes, understood exactly who she was. Liza, Simon said once the audience quieted enough for him to speak, I have sat in this chair for a very long time. I have heard thousands of singers try to convince me their story matters. Most of the time, it's just a story. But what you did up there, that wasn't performance. That was truth. And truth like that doesn't come around often. Liza's hands trembled at her sides. Thank you, she whispered, barely audible. Do you know, Simon continued, what it means when I say I believe every single word you just sang? Liza shook her head, tears now falling freely. It means I believe your mother is the reason you're standing here. And it means, he said, glancing toward the golden buzzer position beside his chair, that I think today, this journey shouldn't end with just an ordinary yes. The other judges immediately understood what was coming, several rising to their feet in anticipation. Simon looked directly at Liza, his expression uncharacteristically soft. Liza Domingo, from the fish markets of Iloilo, I am giving you my golden buzzer. The moment his hand came down, gold confetti exploded from the ceiling, cascading down in glittering sheets over the stage, over the audience, over Liza herself, who stood frozen for a heartbeat before collapsing to her knees, hands covering her face as sobs finally broke through the composure she'd held onto for weeks. The other judges rushed from behind their desk to embrace her, the crowd roaring in a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the building. Through the confetti and the noise, Liza could only think of one thing, her mother, alone in that small house in Iloilo, likely watching through a neighbor's borrowed television signal, finally hearing the sound she had always insisted the world deserved to hear. Backstage, moments later, still shaking, still covered in gold flecks of paper, Liza was handed a phone. It was a video call, arranged quietly by a production assistant who had overheard her story. On the screen, weak but smiling, was Nita, propped up against pillows, tears streaming down her thin face. Anik, her mother said, voice breaking, I heard it. I heard all of it. You sang exactly the way I always knew you could. Liza pressed her palm to the screen as if she could somehow reach through it and hold her mother's hand. I sang for you, Ma. Every note was yours. No, Nita whispered, smiling through her tears. Every note was always yours. I just prayed the world would finally listen. In the weeks that followed, footage of Liza's audition spread far beyond the Philippines, her golden buzzer moment translated and shared and wept over in dozens of languages. But for Liza, none of the numbers, the headlines, or the sudden attention meant as much as the quiet nights that came after, nights spent beside her mother's bed, medicine finally affordable, roof finally repaired, singing softly not for judges or cameras, but simply because, for the first time in her life, singing no longer felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. It felt like home.